Welcome to Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. For this episode, we welcome our first ever guest, Mr. Bharath Sastry, the CEO of Vistaprint India. Over to our hosts. Enjoy.
A big hello to all our listeners. Today is a discontinuity on two fronts. One, you will get to see a video podcast, and two, we have brought along a guest, a mini celebrity, I would like to call him, somebody who Sharon and I have had the pleasure of working with when we were at Mondelez or Cadbury, and somebody whom we have seen very closely working on not just the core marketing function, handling a couple of very difficult categories, but also handling a function that is really core to marketing, which is insights. So, without further ado, let me just introduce Basha to you, or Mr. Bharat Sastry. Hi, Basha. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sudeep. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. Great to catch up with friends after long.
Real pleasure to be having you on the podcast. Sharon and I have been thinking about wanting to get a guest, and we couldn't have thought of a better option to start off this with. So, welcome to the first episode of Copcast, where we have a guest.
That's great. That's great. I've listened to many of your podcasts, and they were like amazing, amazing.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank
Sharon,
you.
why don't you start us off with the first question?
Well, first question is an extension of the introduction. We know Basha heads Vistaprint in India, but before that, before we get into work and understanding marketing or anything else from him, the only other Basha I know is Rajnikant. Can we please know how Bharat Shastri became Basha?
Yeah, yeah. Back in college, guys, when we were actually in Chennai, and we were obviously into Rajnikant. We are still into Rajnikant now. So, one of my close friends in college happened to just call me Basha because he didn't want to call me Bharat Shastri. So he just said, "I just want to shorten your name." And we just watched Basha yesterday, so I'm going to call you Basha. So that just stuck. Actually, it's amazing because many of my campus mates, there'll be people from other hostels and all who won't know you, they still think that I am Basha. Many of the people back in Mondelez also, whom you've not interacted with for long, still think my name is Basha.
It's so much so that when I told my wife Bharat Shastri, she had no idea who I was talking about. So I had to say Basha. I said, oh, okay. So getting on, Basha. The entire show is about conversation in the business of brands. And you've been in it for over 25 years now. Can you give us a time-lapse view of your career that's been for so long?
Yeah, sure. So I started off in Mondelez. And I started off like all marketers do. Back then it was called Cadbury. So started off in sales, then started handling brands of Mondelez, which are some of the Cadbury brands. And then interestingly started looking at the business of brands, and which is what you call COB also, right? COB.
Yeah.
Very soon, back in Cadbury, you started looking at brands as businesses rather than brands as themselves. So looking at business of brands where you got opportunities to look at the whole PLN of brands or companies with portfolio of brands. So I started growing in marketing. I was handling larger portfolios, where in Indonesia, I was handling the whole marketing portfolio of Indonesia. And then after that, I moved into startups where again, I was in the business of brands, trying to build brands. I was working with about 3 or 4 startups as CMO on Trap, trying to build their brands. And now I've been in Vistaprint for the last 7 years.
Wow. So before we progress, the first thing that comes to mind when talking to anybody from Cadbury are the campaigns that you've been part of. So what are the most memorable campaigns you've been part of, brand campaigns that you've done?
Actually, there are so many of them that it's difficult to actually list a few. If I were to think about the campaigns in Cadbury, it was the 5-star campaign. I remember back in 2003, actually, where we had a very different ad than what we used to do earlier, different campaign than what we used to do earlier, and it was actually to do with the relaunch of the brand. Yeah, we had changed the product fully. There were a lot of customer feedback which we had collected at that point of time, which talked about the product being sticky, and so hence we made it soft. The campaign which we launched, it was called Johnny Johnny, and that was one of I mean, that was one of the campaigns which was very different than what we used to do earlier. Earlier, you used to talk more about the imagery of Five Star, but we started rooting it completely on the product. That was the first time we talked about the product and what the product does to you. And also the whole, we changed the personality of the brand to make it more quirky and humorous, which is continued to this day. So that is one of the campaigns. Another one in Cadbury would be the Eclairs campaign, the chocolate ka meetha bomb one. So that was another memorable one, and that again was something where all parts of the mix changed. So the product changed, and we earlier used to not talk about the product, so we talked about the product and what it does to you. Interestingly, we framed the brand position also at that point of time. So we completely changed the brand positioning and got in the positioning of Eclairs being a chocolate, which actually gives you a moment to where you just give in. The campaign was also very different. It talked about a chocolate bursting in your head. So that was Chocolate Kabita Bomb. So these were some of the campaigns.
Awesome. So this was the birthplace of Ramesh and Suresh, with the Five-Star going the quirky route.
Yes. Before that, I mean, that's where it actually started.
Awesome. Also, I think Ramesh and Suresh have got great fans.
I think both of them, Sharon. For example, when Bharath was talking about Five-Star relaunch and caramel being softer, I was reminded of the 2013 work that we did on Eclairs, where we did exactly the same thing. To make it less sticky, we made the caramel softer. Similarly, when Basha did Chocolate Ka Meetha Bomb in 2009, I think many years later, when we were trying to romanticize the product of Rich Brownie, the 2 rupee variant, we actually did almost the same thing. It was just a more than the Meetha Bomb, it was full orchestra because we wanted to show it even bigger than Bomb.
That's brilliant that you say that, because what's worked on one brand is been almost templatized to be used on another brand to serve a similar purpose. And one is at 1 rupee, 2 rupees versus 5 and 10 on Five-Star. That's awesome, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen the fountain work also. It's really amazing. I mean, actually, what's pretty interesting is the fundamental product differences and campaigns that bring them alive in a simple manner really work wonders. And I'm sure, I mean, when you did these product changes, you would have seen the kind of, say, customer feedback and growth you would have got.
Correct. No doubt. Customer delight possibly is the best thing that a product can deliver. Everything else is just a medium of doing so. So no doubt about that, Basha. So Basha, from there, because you have just touched upon one of the things which you said, that if you are able to deliver this to the consumer. So my next question was about to be around the same thing, that while doing work on so many different brands across different geographies, uh, some brand principles that you have picked up, brand building principles that you've picked up, with some of our listeners who are startup founders or brand owners, business owners, you would want them to keep in mind when they are building their brands?
Sure. Actually, one of the things which I've learned, or one of the kind of templates, if you may say, which I've learned over time, in which I used to structure my own thoughts, is the brand ladder template. You may have heard of it, but there are different templates. I mean, when you look at brand positioning, there are many companies use different templates. I personally found it pretty simple and powerful, actually. I mean, that's why I use it. So I'll also try and share this brand ladder with you. So that's one of the tools I use. So this is actually what I use when start looking at brands. So it has a ladder. So there are insights right at the bottom, which is consumer insights or customer insights, which is actually what do customers really need, and trying to find out what is the truth in their lives. Yeah. Then you have the product features, which is the features of the particular brand or the product, and what benefits does it offer, which is functional benefits, which is what are the rational benefits do I get from it. So what do I get? And then there is the emotional benefits. So how does that make me feel? So I've used this simple template across almost all my brands, and even now in Vistaprint to actually build the brand as we're talking about it. So when you look at this brand template, actually, once you start framing it, once you start meeting customers, trying to find out their insights, and also trying to try to build the brand ladder, slowly and surely the clarity about what your brand stands for, which is the brand positioning, becomes clear. So I've tried to also illustrate this with an example of Coke and what I called actually brand in a page. Like it's powerful for me because you can have the whole brand in one page.
Right.
So if you look at Coke, and I'm hypothesizing about some of the insights and benefits here. So the insight can be when I'm with friends, family, or I'm alone. It's great to have something to lift my mood. And Coke is a refreshing, fizzy, cold beverage, which is the best tasting cola, which is the functional benefit, which provides me happiness, which is the emotional benefit. And the brand position they've used over time was very simply open happiness.
Right.
So with this as the brand ladder, what I used to do for most of my brands was also put in the other things to make it the whole brand in a page, like the creative roots, which can change. Coke is right now using infectious laughter as one of the creative roots. The brand territory for Coke, it's youthful, social, joyful, and brand differentiators. Yeah. What I normally try to do is try to arrive at the brand in a page the first time we start handling brands, and that actually helped me a lot.
Awesome, Basha. Now, in this, if let's say if a startup person was to use it for their brand, for a new brand, where would they start? Should they start with the target audience, or should they start with the insight? Should they? But most of them have a product when they begin. So, is the ideal starting point for this?
Actually, I mean, this is much more useful for startups, and I'm glad you asked that. Because established brands, as you know, would have this in place. So when you want to put this in place for established brands, it's more about finding what already exists, yeah,
Right.
and then trying to sharpen it and put it in a page. But for startups, actually, I mean, there is a chance where you'll be able to also create, right? Especially the emotional benefit part is what I felt,
Right.
where you could actually really create, and which needs a little bit of imagination too. But anyway, coming back to the starting point, I think you start with the insight first. So you'd start with meeting customers first. I mean, and that will be one of the most important things to do, which is meeting consumers or customers or people or like human beings or whatever you may call them. So meeting people and trying to find out what they do. Of course, in relation to the category that you're working in or to the brand that you're working in. So if you're working in beauty, you talk about that. If you're working in customization, you talk about that. Yeah. So try to talk and try to figure out what can be some of the insights. Yeah. Normally you start with observations, like what customers say or do, and then when you try to figure out why they do it, yeah, and when you try to ask them why they do it, you tend to get into deeper insights. Yeah. So figuring out the insight, I would say, would be the first thing. And for a startup, I mean, normally you would have the product features or some of them at least in place, right? So you would be having a kind of a product idea in place.
Right.
And then in the context of the insight, we'll have to start delving deeper into what the product actually delivers to the customer or the consumer. So what do you get from the product? And then you move into functional benefits, and which is the next step of the ladder. And then once you start asking them about how do you feel about it, yeah, then you start getting the more emotional benefits. And once you have this in place for a startup, I think it's pretty powerful, because it gives a lot of direction to what you do for the whole business, and what you stand for. And it's also pretty inspiring for employees in a startup. When you say that my brand stands for enhancing the joy, or something like that, I mean, it really is pretty inspiring. And believe me, it works wonders. I mean, once you do it in startup, it works real wonders.
Nice. No, I think it makes a lot of sense, Basha. I would possibly add one more thing, Sharon, to this, where, like Basha says, if you are able to arrive at a great articulation of what your product delivers emotionally and functionally to the consumer, I think a lot of the startup owners are worried that how do I get it right the first time? Yeah.
Right.
And one of
True.
the things that we discussed was that you make your best attempt, and all of these are iterative. Over a period of time, consumers will tell you what is the best articulation they like, and therefore you can
Right.
then start moving around them. But don't put the pressure on yourself to get it perfect the right time around, because the consumer layers also unravel over a period of time. What do you think, Basha?
I think that's a great point. And normally, I mean, you try to actually get this so much to perfection, and you're looking at all other brands. You're looking at Coke. You're looking at Nike. You're looking at some of the Indian big brands, and trying to see that you want to get it perfect, but needn't work that way. As long as you have a benefit that is resonating, however you articulate it, it's going to build your brand. So start communicating the benefit in whatever you have articulated it as, because it's going to start building the brand from scratch. And as Sudeep said, as you keep iterating, you tend to become better, you tend to become more sharper at articulating it, and you can start building it. But the important thing is to once have it in place, and once if it resonates, start communicating.
Absolutely, Vash. I think you also preempted my next question, which was to say, how can this be used to build your differentiation versus competition? So I think just getting started and finding your own space itself is a differentiation driver. But is there something you can do very intentionally with the brand ladder concept to identify your differentiation in the market?
Uh, I mean, yes. I mean, if you look at startups, you would have, say, if I take the example, you would have many startups playing with, say, similar kind of products, right? So in a way, if you look at some of the points of differentiation, startups may have some points of differentiation. So, and that would automatically come into the or the brand ladder. I mean, if I have, for example, in cosmetics, if I have something which is related to, say, natural ingredients or something like that, so that's a kind of a differentiator which can automatically come in a brand ladder, and that will make it powerful. But I also feel that sometimes, even if some of the differences are not there, just just having what you deliver to the customer and starting communicating about it itself and owning that in the minds of the consumer itself creates the differentiation. And that's been my experience. So if there are, say, five companies doing the same thing, if you actually uh, um, uh, found out the customer benefits and started communicating about it, you are differentiated, because the first thing that the customer or the consumer thinks about is when he or she thinks about the product is, or the category is, you. And that's the way where I've seen actually uh, differentiation versus competition, or if I say market leadership, build. So the day you start actually communicating about your brand is when you start really differentiating and moving away and becoming market leaders.
I think
Fair.
Sudeep also touched upon this point recently when you spoke about Indigo. Do you want to talk about that point, Sudeep?
Yeah, so I think what we meant at that point in time was that your branding starts significantly before marketing. When you design your product, your communication around it very thoughtfully, when you understand your consumer well, and then you really, that passion, that energy, that affinity to the consumer, that empathy with the consumer really reflects in whatever you do around the brand. And in that context, Basha,
Right.
I was just mentioning that Indigo, you for example, they have, over a period of time, they have spoken about on time performance repeatedly. Now many of us have also experienced it firsthand. Now it is possible that a lot of the other airlines have better on time performance on paper, but since these guys have demonstrated and they have been speaking about it, that creates a positioning for them. Now that is something that I will, therefore, if I need on time performance, I would most likely choose Indigo over anybody else, regardless of the on paper performance.
Absolutely, I think that's like very well articulated with an example. I mean, that's exactly what I was also trying to say.
And Basha, tell us, while we spoke about principles, you gave us an idea about brand on a page. This journey must have been also enriching in terms of, you would have possibly come across a number of, what should I say, truths, insights, etc., which possibly could be myth busting for a lot of people who are looking at marketing today. Yeah, one of the for example, we just spoke about the fact that you don't need to get your brand articulation absolutely perfect the first time around. Don't need to obsess over it. So that's possibly first myth that we possibly can burst. Anything, any few more bits that you've come across while working with startups that you would like to bust?
Um, yeah, I mean, one of the most common things, whether it's startups or brands that I have come across is trying to actually fit the brand to a new opportunity and the problems that we create. Problems that gets created because of that. So normally, I mean, when you try to grow brands and you try to look at opportunities, right, and opportunities of how to grow it. So sometimes an opportunity looks pretty enticing. Yeah. Now, for example, you're playing in a particular category or you're playing in a particular kind of benefits. There is an opportunity somewhere which looks pretty enticing, which is pretty, where say some of the other categories are playing, or it's an empty kind of a category. What I've seen is sometimes that really takes over, and you try to become who you don't as a brand. So you try to actually get into that opportunity and try to extend yourself beyond what is possible. Yeah, so that's a very common kind of an error which takes a lot of time to correct, actually, because you try to capture the opportunity but are not true to the brand. Okay, so again, I mean, having the brand ladder and having, I mean, or whatever template we have or whatever template you have in place is very critical, because you know the limits of your brand. Having that in place actually is powerful, because you know the opportunities that it creates, but it also comes with limitations.
It goes into the where to play section, Basha. So, is there an example you can give us for this?
Yeah. Actually, there have been many examples where I've come through, both with established brands as well as startups. I mean, one of the ones which I have handled has been Eclairs. At one point of time, we were looking at what could be some of the growth opportunities for Eclairs, and one of the huge growth opportunities that the team had come across at that point of time was the fact that you could play in a space which was a little adjacent to Eclairs, which was in the hard-boiled candy space. Yeah,
Hmm.
very briefly, Eclairs is a product which you can chew, and you have a gush of chocolate, and which you actually get immersed into, right, for the moment.
Right,
Hard-boiled candy, or for example, say Alpenliebe place, is where you actually keep going on and on. So it's like it's like you can do your work and you can keep sucking on it, and yeah, and keep
right.
going for long. So these were two distinct benefits. So, but looking at this market opportunity, yeah, we at that point of time, the team had thought that we could actually extend Eclairs into that zone by having a kind of a similar product like Alpenliebe, while having the chocolate inside that is dairy. The issue here was that, I mean, the whole functional benefit and the emotional benefits of Eclairs were very different, right? So we were about the gush of chocolate in which you immerse yourself, a moment where you give in, right? So the product was launched finally, and after the business was built for a couple of years, we had to take it back because we understood that this was not Eclairs.
Because it wasn't in sync with the brand ladder of Eclairs.
Yes, exactly.
And Sharon, I think, make no mistake, the product did decently okay to start with.
No, I remember the product was great actually.
Yeah.
I remember the product. Yeah.
Most of these things actually doesn't depend on the product, and that's a
Yeah.
that's a great point, actually, because many a time we look at product research, and once you, taking this example, compare yourself to Alpenliebe and you actually win significantly. I mean, you assume that you've really got a winner, but you've not, because that's not an Eclairs. Fine.
Exactly. I think you touched upon a great point there, Basha, because I work with a lot of founders who spend so much time on their product. And they say, my product is so many times better than anybody else in the market. But they struggle to get traction and they don't understand why. I think, and this probably kind of hits the nail on the head, saying it's not about the product as much as you'd want to believe it. It's not always about the product. In
Yeah,
fact, most of the time it's not.
yeah, yeah. In
Okay.
fact, yeah, the another myth, actually, I mean, as we were talking about Mythbusters, is an extension of the same thing that I've normally found that, I mean, when you take this example, I mean, it is actually an innovation, right? So we classify it as an innovation. That is, you move into a space where you try to actually launch a different product. I've actually found that most of the case renovations, that is looking at your product, which in itself is big, and even if you make small changes there, will have much bigger results than a big innovation that you do in a different space.
Oh, wow.
So coming back to the example that you were talking about, that in 2013 you had done some changes to Eclairs where you made it more delightful to customers, and even small changes if you make on big brands actually deliver much bigger results than a big innovation.
Very true.
True.
Very true. Now, touching upon startups, Basha, you moved into the startup world far before it became cool to do so. This was what, back in 2014, 15. So, what motivated that change at all? Because we know the kind of not just fan following you had at Cadbury, you were among the top guys there, and then you switched into the startup world completely. What was this move all about, and what drove that change?
Actually, I mean, at that point of time, it was the whole thing about actually building brands and building businesses was really exciting to me. And it's the same thing even now, even after about 9 years in startups now. I mean, I have the same kind of enthusiasm. But it was also coupled with the ability to take a lot of decisions on your own too, which should normally be difficult. I mean, not in all companies, but in some companies it'd be difficult. I mean, even if you're say the marketing head of India or the marketing head for a particular brand. I mean, there are a lot of other structures in big MNCs, right? You have regional teams, you have global teams which are working. So the decision is not, or the kind of consumer understanding that you have, and translating that into say decisions that you would like to do. I mean, it's not as empowering there. So that was one of the reasons, and you can also see able to see the results of your actions pretty significantly also in startups, right? So when you're able to actually put in stuff like, say, talking to customers, building a brand ladder, and actually communicating about the brand, the kind of results that you see are significant. So it was more satisfying,
Very nice. Okay, excellent. So, Basha, I think we possibly have so many facets to talk about from your career itself. I think we can dedicate just one episode to discovering each part of your career journey and then trying to delve deeper into it. I would want to change a little bit of gears and take you towards, you know, marketing oriented learning. Some of them we have already spoken about. Uh, your career also helped you market things like candies, impulse purchase products, to market something like cars, completely planned purchase products. While in Cadbury, we used to talk between candy and Bonvita. Now, your example is a little more extreme. Yeah. So, on an impulse scale, they are at diametrically opposite ends. What do you think are things which are common? And what do you think are things which you possibly discovered which are completely different between the two categories?
I mean, actually, interestingly, when I moved to startups like say Cartrade, where I was handling cars, both new cars and used cars, and on the side, you really don't feel out of place, actually, right? So I'm just talking about my feeling when I moved there, or when I started helping other startups and also moved to Vistaprint. Really don't feel too strange or too different. I would say that's because, I mean, some of the brand principles remain the same. I mean, wherever you go, the whole, say, process of building the brand ladder, which is talking to customers about insights. I mean, finding out the insight. What are the product features of the brand, and what are the benefits do they give customers? These things just don't change. Whichever industry you're in, whether you're in impulse, whether you're in cars, whether anywhere. I mean, and that's one of the that's I think that's one of the beauties of actually spending time in learning about classical brand building, especially as marketers, is that just doesn't change across industries. So wherever you go, you'll be able to apply those principles as long as you've really like learned and implemented them. So that didn't change. I mean, what definitely changes is the activation. I mean, if I may call it the brand, if I'm a brand, the principles of brand positioning don't change, but activation changes. So, I mean, in Impulse, you would do signage. I mean, you would do a lot of, for example, say in Cadbury, you would do a lot of things related to appetite appeal, right? So when you go to a modern trade outlet or when you go to a store, when you look at a product with appetite appeal, I mean, with good product shots, I mean that generates a lot of impulse. So which is activation. I mean, say higher value purchases, you need to spend a lot of time on content. So in car trade, you would spend a lot of time on actually comparing cars, explaining about cars, and you would spend a lot of time on owned media, which is on your website, trying to give as much information to make the consumer journey easier. So stuff like that. So I saw. I mean, I've seen that the activation part is something which really changes. But the most important thing, which is the positioning part, doesn't change.
Cars, Basha, I'd say, in the Indian context at least, are the second most important purchase in a person's life after their home. So, how long does the transactions take, and how long must marketing be involved in this conversion? Because I know, coming from FMCG, we are all about the moment of truth, but I assume it's not just the moment of truth. There's a journey of truth in the categories you've operated. So how does that work? What does marketing have to take additionally in a journey like that?
So actually, I mean, we were in a place where we were actually giving options of cars right on our site. So it was not necessarily about the purchase of the car in the end. So I mean, you were actually helping the customer in the journey. I mean, what really mattered was the ease with which the customer would be able to say make that choice, whether it was used cars or whether it was new cars. So I mean, in your journey of actually finding out what would be the car for me, I mean, you try to find out as much from the customer as possible about who he or she is, and try to actually make that easier by say displaying those particular cars and making it easier by actually giving comparisons of those cars to him or her.
It's about the journey, being partners in the content journey,
Absolutely.
and giving them the right information basis what they're looking for, and then partnering through the journey. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's well put, actually.
Basha, we keep getting a lot of questions, around, especially the people who have done classical marketing, where we propagate the fact that you should invest behind building brands, look at slightly longer term measures, etc. On one end, we talk about this, and then there are, a lot of the startups are fund crunched, and therefore, the first and the foremost thing that they look at is performance marketing, and therefore the ACOS. What is the advertising cost to sales today? What is the kind of sale that is coming through? So how do you balance these two? How do you invest uh, behind the brand in the long run, while fulfilling expectations that your investors, your employees, and everybody else has, from a performance marketing point of view, that every money that you spend will be justified immediately using sales? How do you navigate that?
I normally have followed the principle of having a balance between the two. If I may say a thumb rule, a 50-50 balance between performance marketing as well as brand marketing. There may not be any right or wrong answers. That's worked for me, actually. And but doing both together really helped. I mean, what is helping nowadays is that you can actually measure this really well. You can measure the impact of both performance and brand marketing as well as together over a customer's life cycle. The earlier days where you used to say that half the marketing dollars are wasted, and I don't know which half. I mean, it's no longer true. You actually know when it's getting wasted. So I mean, for example, you can actually measure when a customer or a cohort of customers, once you put in a kind of a marketing spend, break even. And you can also calculate the lifetime value of those customers. I mean, so once they come back to you and do a repeat purchase, and how much they do. So based on history, I mean, you would actually be able to say measure it. So it's easier nowadays to actually have a kind of an assessment of the spend and the combination too. I also feel that the brand building part is not necessarily only long term. The maximum benefits are long term. For example, obviously brand building will help all the strategic aspects, right? Like market leadership, like entry barriers. I mean, once you have a strong position in the consumer's mind, it's difficult for other people to enter and appropriate it. So entry barriers, pricing. I mean, you'll be able to actually say increase your pricing when people see more value in your brand. So these are some of the long term benefits you have from marketing, but they're not necessarily only long term. You can also, once you start doing them, you can actually have short term benefits too. So within the year, for example, say when you do brand building, you have a lot of especially in startups, you get a lot of visits to your site, right? And they would start trying out the product. So I also think it's a short term business driver as well as a long term.
That's an amazing point, Bashar, to say that there are short-term benefits also to brand marketing. But a lot of the measurements today are around the performance in direct marketing and the lifetime value analysis. But are there any short-term measures that we can use for brand marketing to check how well your brand on the mind measures is doing? And just to needle your insights background, are there any jugaad ways to go about doing this? Because startups don't really have the money or don't want to spend too much money on something on measuring brand marketing.
Yeah, I think some of the really easy ways are looking at the visits on your site, and if you have a site and you're doing brand building, looking at some of the visits on the site and what are the source of the visits. So if it's directly on the site or through organic search, so that will be some of the measures, and how that contribution of the visits from, say, the free or the brand channels is growing over time. That would be an easy measure, and you don't need to spend anything there. You can also look at, obviously you look at, say, the contribution to revenue growth, right? The contribution of those customers to revenue growth, even in the short term. Yeah, and you would see that growing. I have actually seen that growing within a year. Once you actually start communicating about your brand, not only with respect to, say, ads or anything like that, but even when your website talks about the benefit that you offer, which is the first place to actually start with. You would see growth happening from these channels. So looking at the free and brand channels, for example, would be one measure. You could look at studies like YouTube has a brand lift study. If you do a campaign in YouTube, they do offer something called a brand lift study. So you could look at stuff like that, which give you a good idea about how your brand awareness and brand preference is moving. If obviously, if you don't have a kind of a continuous brand track, so these are some of the things which you can look at.
People tend to take these little bits for granted, in the sense they have only one dimension of looking at these measures. I think it sheds a lot of light to say how you can actually measure your brand spends too, and not being immediately measurable is not necessarily the reason why you don't invest behind brand marketing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Okay, Basha, in your current stint, you must have definitely dangled into B2C as well as B2B marketing. Can you just help elaborate to our listeners your key learnings from both? How do you think both pan out on possibly, say, a digital to start with? And are there other avenues where they completely differ from each other?
Actually, personally, whenever I hear the term B2B, B2C, D2C, I think right now, right? I get completely confused. Somebody asked me, "Are you in B2B? Are you in D2C?" I normally I don't know what to say. So I want to say, I'm in the business of building brands, as you call it. Actually, in the classical sense, B2B actually means that you're. It's not about the customer. It's not about whether you're selling to a business or a customer. It actually means that it means that it's not a finished product that you're selling. So, you have a kind of an unfinished product to which you do modifications and sell. So that is B2B, right? And when you're selling a finished product, it is B2C. Yeah. But anyway, even after I found the definition, it is quite irrelevant actually, because I feel that all of us are in B2C. Now that C can be consumers, they can be businesses, they can be anyone actually. So as long as it's like a person or a group of persons, I think it is B2C. So that way, I've always considered myself as, say, B2C, or in the business of actually building brands for customers or consumers or people or groups of people.
A friend of mine put it saying, doesn't matter whether you're B2B, B2C, you're P2P, a person to person. No matter whatever channel you're going through, it is one person is making a decision. And how you can influence that decision is all that makes the difference.
I agree.
So, because I've, I started appreciating possibly a slightly different side once I started working with Pidilite, where most of the products, while they are in the service of consumers, are used and applied by a set of contractors. Now, traditionally, while the contractor is using the product, the final benefit is derived by the consumer, and hence you are talking to an intermediary to the consumer.
Got it.
And that is possibly a lot of people meant when they said B2B, that you're talking to somebody who is a professional who is again going to use your product for somebody's satisfaction. And one of my this thing was that what the consumer derives is delight, emotional satisfaction, etc. out of the features and benefits that you provide out of a product. You're selling to an intermediary is a little more layered, because not only are you satisfying their needs, their personal needs, but you're also helping them visualize how this will satisfy the needs of their primary consumer. And hence the dialogue with a B2B consumer is a little more involved, a little more high context, high content. And hence a lot of the cases, for example, pharma companies use guys who go around from doctor to doctor, they do doctor detailing, etc., because it requires that much explanation and possibly building conviction far beyond attracting the consumer to make a purchase. So in that context, then while the overall, what I found was overall brand principles remain the same, you just need to make sure that when you're making your brand ladder, in your brand ladder you have to also keep the intermediary in your mind. So therefore there is a consumer benefit, and then there is a layer of the contractor or the intermediary benefit, and a lot of the time you would see that they might conflict, and hence you have to find mutually non-conflicting spaces for both of them, so that they become complementary to each other rather than conflicting to each other.
Finding the commonalities. I mean, really interesting.
But getting back to what you do at Vistaprint, Basha, I loved the campaign you did about the very good tailor.
Yeah.
See, a lot of the sensibilities carried on, and I didn't quite imagine at that point a business card printing company to make such an entertaining, funny communication out there. I thought it was very impressive. Could you just walk us through what thinking happened within Vistaprint? I'm sure it must have been new to Vistaprint because it is India specific. So could you just walk us through what happened in that campaign?
Yeah, surely. I mean, it was obviously very, very enjoyable. I mean, doing the particular campaign and also doing some of our latest ones. Once you have the kind of thought in place, like you have the brand ladder in place, the brand in a paid slide, which I normally follow, I've talked about the creative route, right? So the idea was to come to kind of a creative route. So how do you communicate it, and what do you do? Some of the things that I have followed is actually to try to give as much freedom to the creative person as possible, while keeping them rooted to the benefit, right? So as long as that is clear, try to go as wild as possible. So I actually call it go wild while being rooted. Sometimes you may tend to go wild just for the sake of it, right? Which is great advertising in itself, but it's not great advertising for the brand. And sometimes, I mean, obviously you talk about the brand, and it may not be as say great in creativity. Actually, I would prefer the latter. I mean, it's okay not to be great in creativity, but talk about the brand rather than be outstandingly different, but talk about something really different. But when you get the combination of both, then absolutely it's wonderful. So it's one of the campaigns where it actually happened. This was done by Sideways. So I mean, some of the earlier Ogilvy guys who were there, I was in touch with. So we got talking, and then talked to them about the benefit that we have. The message for Vistaprint, that we want to actually create a professional identity. We wanted to talk about the emotional benefit of pride, that is associated with actually creating that identity. So that was a brief, and within that brief, I actually tried to encourage as many wild thoughts as possible.
Interesting. I'm sure Kinu would have appreciated all that encouragement from your end of going wild. Must have given him a good canvas to paint. Excellent. Basha, Sharon mentioned this earlier, the CMO on tap, the work that you did in the middle. That's a very interesting one. Honestly, not many of us have been exposed to it. How does that work? especially for the listeners that we have from the startup ecosystem, if they are considering talking to somebody like that, what should be their consideration? When should they think about talking to a CMO on tap, etc.? Just help us demystify this space a little bit.
When I was actually working on Consumer Tap, I actually found a lot of potential in the idea because many startup founders are actually trying to build a longer lasting company and a longer lasting brand, right? But many of them, I mean, are from say finance background, strategy. I mean, they're passionate about the idea, but they need kind of support in building brands. Even now, if you look at many of the startup companies, you just go to the websites, the top banner, you just see 25% off season sale, right? So I still don't understand. I mean, if you go to the top 5 startups you can think of and see, most of them would have this on the top banner. I mean, there is a lot of potential in actually building brands for startups. Because finally, I mean, your marquee, coming back to that, should actually talk about your brand, right? You should actually talk about what you offer to the customer. There is a lot of potential of actually building brands with startups. I mean, which I also saw. I was working with about 3 or 4 startups at that point of time. I mean, personally, I mean, I was thinking of Print under the same remit, but it just happened that I was so excited by the space that you're in that started working there full time. But the CMO on tap space, especially for startups in India, would be really add a lot of value.
So you would therefore advise startups who don't have in-house marketing capability to engage somebody like this till they can afford a full-time CMO or some marketing guy of their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now a CMO on tap, therefore, it works on what you do some hours during a week. There's a certain engagement defined in terms of hours as well as deliverables. How does this work?
The idea actually is that you would be an interim marketing head for the startup, or you would be a part-time um, uh, you would be a part-time marketing resource for the startup. So it depends on the kind of work that is needed. For people who are just starting up, I mean, you could actually help in making the brand positioning as well as presenting to investors about the ideas along with the founder on what the brand is about. I mean, I had done that many a time actually. Because at that point of time, people were also looking to present to investors about the idea. So once you have a kind of a brand position in place about what the customer needs, I mean, that adds a lot of strength to the idea itself. Right. So it could be either. It could be interim, or it could be a part-time.
Part-time. Interesting.
Role.
Okay.
So you said you started off with Vistaprint on a part-time basis and then got in fully, Basha. So what does, just to go a little deeper into what Vistaprint does, I know you print more than business cards today. You do a whole lot of merchandising. So, but just sticking to business cards, what kind of businesses still use business cards today? And what does it mean to a lot of these founders? Because I've got my business cards also from Vistaprint, but I think I've given out like 3 of them in the last 2 months. That shows a lot about my networking skills. But that aside, what do people generally use it for? Because people share contacts today, right?
Yeah, true. But it's amazing. It's one of our top growing products actually. Business cards. Even now. Even when you say this, because a lot of people actually obviously use it to create an impression or to create an identity about what they do, about what the company does, and they obviously give it to promote their business. We were talking about the Taylor ad. I mean, there you actually talk about the kind of, say, pride you are associating with your identity, right? With the fact that, I have a kind of an identity. So I have actually started a business, or I have actually started something which is going to last for longer, or I'm in the process of creating a legacy. So those are some of really the kind of say emotions that are attached. When you're actually creating an identity. So even when you've done your business card, even if you've not like given it to people, the fact that you're seeing it and feeling and looking at your logo and feeling a kind of association with it itself is something.
Right. I think that's very true. Even if nobody's appreciating or nobody's seeing your brand, the fact that you see it gives you the pride and the chance to go on a daily basis.
Mhm. No, I think Sharan has also found, for example, various ways of making his brand reach people, and hence possibly he might not need the business card as much. But you're right, Basha. A lot of the people who are just starting up, not even just founders, just small business owners, will derive so much pride and joy out of it. I can actually make see your ad actually makes it come alive.
So, Basha, today you spoke about how you help founders pitch to investors and all that. In today's VC climate, the funding climate, calling it the funding winter, with money difficult to come by and a lot of startups actually priding themselves on working on a loss and not making a profit. And when the money supply stops, the first thing that gets cut is the brand building investments. So we're all marketers and we believe that shouldn't be the case, but you've been leading a business for a while. So how should people approach this funding winter? And if at all, how can a brand help a business drive profitability?
I honestly feel what is happening right now is really great because there is a sense that profitability matters. I mean, finally, you would say. I mean, after this initial, anybody was getting money, right? I mean, you just go and present, and you would get some funding. So it's great that finally profitability, as it has to finally come in, and emphasis on that. Especially related to brand building, I mean, I really don't feel that we need to spend a lot when you think about brand building. When you think about brand building, I mean, normally, I mean, you would think about big ads, whether it's on TV or YouTube, etc. We don't. I really feel we don't need to think about it. Start thinking about it that way, at least when you're a startup.
Right,
Can start thinking about how we can communicate what we have actually say articulated like a brand benefit in whatever manner possible, right? It needn't be a TV ad. It can just be a simple WhatsApp message actually, or it
right,
can just be what we say on our website, right? Or I mean, it can be a simple LinkedIn message where I just put in my website and talk about it. It's as simple as that. As long as I even say it, I mean, I'm not talking about creativity also here. As long as I even say it, I mean, that can be the starting point, right? Owned
right.
media, as I call it, can be the starting point, which is websites, organic search. I mean, having content on your website which talks about what you stand for, right? I mean, you can start with that way. I mean, gone are the days when you actually need like huge TV ads to talk about brands. I mean, a simple message itself can do. And I mean, creating videos are also so easy nowadays, right? I mean, so I mean, even if you are not going wild, as we talked about earlier, it's still creating a kind of a caption which can just air even in some of your free channels would be a great way to start.
Right. And I increasingly start I've been telling a lot of the founders saying your brand building is not about your advertising. It is so much more than just advertising. Getting your basics, like the ladder in place, getting your internal thinking right helps. But on the brand building, Marshall, just to stress on the last question is, how do you think brand building can help a business turn profitable? As in, how can it help your profitability? Or can it at all?
I mean, I would actually put it as it is necessary for profitability rather than it helping. It's absolutely necessary because of the kind of strategic advantages that it has, and hence it is absolutely necessary. I mean, if you're going to actually talk about, or if you're going to go the discounted route, it's not. I mean, as we know, it's not going to last for long, right? People are going to buy it for the discounts and then move somewhere else. I mean, as long as you don't own the position, so it is absolutely essential that you need to communicate, or you need to have some kind of a presence in the consumer's mind on what you stand for, right? And hence it's absolutely essential. And the long term advantages again are creating a position for yourself, market leadership, ability to last long, continue over time, entry barriers to competition, etc.
Right, right, right. I think that puts it very clearly. Say why you must be investing in brand marketing and building your brand as a hygiene factor, not just something that you turn to for short term gains. I think this
Yeah.
hygiene is what's very, very important in any size of the organization.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And as long as your unit economics work, I mean, once you look at, say, a business's variable margins, generally, I mean, which is revenue minus your variable costs, you have a kind of a margin. And I mean, as long as marketing is within that and like a percentage of that, and then you can easily do a kind of a unit economics to say how profitable you are post marketing and fixed costs at an EBITDA level. So once you have that basic business kind of a plan in place, I mean, you can operate at that level of marketing itself using the kind of say opportunities that are there right now to communicate about your brand.
Fair. Fair. Basha, in your journey thus far, you would have come across a lot of marketers. Yeah. Now, I want uh, to ask you about your advice, career advice for marketers. And the question has two parts to it, Basha. There are marketers who are working in traditional companies and who seem to think that they are missing out on all the fun and the cutting edge work that is going around in startups. And then there are marketers who are working on there in startups, but they don't have access to seasoned marketing professionals. They don't have the right kind of grounding on all the marketing principles, etc., because they're just running campaigns. Now both of them, what will be your advice to both of them separately or combined, whichever way you want to structure it?
I would say one common advice, and which is the most basic, is actually meeting customers, meeting consumers, meeting people, which would be common to everyone and to all of us actually. I mean, just talking to people about what they do in with the risk in context of the category which you're in actually is the most important. So meeting consumers, trying to find out what they want. I mean, showing your product, showing competitor products, finding out what are some of the advantages. So that is invaluable. For people in startups, I mean, I do feel that there needs to be a little bit of understanding of brand building, in case you've not had experience on it. So maybe maybe talking to brand consultants like Sharon, or talking to CMO on tap, or talking to or trying to actually just do an online course on brand building itself, so that you appreciate it. You don't need to like create a position yourself. You don't have that experience, but you should at least know. I mean, when you see it, the potential of it, right? And what you can do with it. Trying to build that, I think, would be, would be one thing. For the other set who are with established brands, I think, I mean, just have a lot of fun with them. At any point of time, you feel that you're not able to have fun, or you're not able to make the kind of decisions that you want to make, or you want to see you spend too much of time making PPTs rather than meeting consumers and actually building brands. I think move to start.
I think that's gold, but I think a lot of us, especially from the established FMCG stable or even Cadbury stable, kind of take it for granted. I think this is one place where startups can actually have a leap over even the established large companies. Because one of the companies I worked for, I had a 2-month battle to be allowed to go meet consumers.
Oops. Okay.
Because I was told there's enough data. What do you want to meet consumers for?
Or maybe they considered you hazardous to consumers, Sharon.
That also could be, like I'm doing now. I'm not naming the company, but I wouldn't blame them for that. But the thinking that data is a substitute for meeting consumers is largely widespread. In fact, to a surprising level. And a lot of startups also take comfort in data versus actually facing the truth by talking to consumers directly. And that, I think, itself, just talking to people, understanding the truth of how your brand is being consumed or the context of your brand's consumption, I think would hold any marketer in good stead for it.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. Um, Yeah, but also as an extension of it, now you're talking about it. I mean, one thing which is like really worked for me is to, I mean, act like a consumer or to, yeah. To, I mean, when you're looking at, say, your own brand, or when you're looking at a creative, or when you're looking at a kind of a benefit, uh, finally we are normal people, right? So we are. I mean, we are going to like react as much. I mean, like how our consumers will react most of the time, right? So just see how you would react. I mean, how your wife would react, or how your mom would react, or how your child would react, or how you would react actually, right? That itself would be a big barometer of how most of other consumers and the whole world will react.
Fair, fair. I think that's a very fair point. It's a very fair point. Okay, excellent. I think, Basha, we could just keep going on and on. We're having lots of fun. I can see a big smile across Sharon's face as well. But we also have to be conscious about the time that our listeners are putting in. I think we've covered a fairly wide-ranging set of topics, from the start of your career to why are you called Basha, to some of the principles that you've learned through the differences between selling a candy and a car, how you look at startup space, how you look at bigger brands, your advice for marketers as well as entrepreneurs. I think there are a lot of nuggets that honestly I am carrying back with myself, and I'm sure all our listeners would have picked up a lot of stuff that they would wanted to otherwise hear from somebody as seasoned as you. If there are any questions that our listeners have, I would advise all of them to just drop in the comments, and we will make sure that we hound Basha till he answers them. and and therefore it has been very very enriching session, Basha. Thank you very much for doing this.
I mean, thanks so much. It was really enriching for me too, and it was absolutely enjoyable. Yeah? And you're right. We could have I could have continued for much longer too. I mean, it was really really fun.
We'll probably then do another episode in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Basha. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you for watching Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. For credits and other references, check the show notes or visit cobcast.net. That's COBBCAST.net. See you on the next episode.